Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People, and the upcoming, yet to be revealed, third Banneker Bones adventure, yesterday was going swimmingly. Today, so far, not going so well. This is how it is with writing. You get your bad days, but either way, it should hopefully be available for you in January. In the meantime, you can check out Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees as a paperback, an audiobook, and the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So go ahead and get yourself a copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written horror novels such as the young adult novel All Together Now a Zombie Story, Pizza Delivery, All Right Now a Short Zombie Story, and of course the 5-volume mega serial horror novel, The Book of David, which is a very long, very inappropriate for a middle grade audience novel in the style of Stephen King. If you're curious about that, you can check out the first of 5 volumes, The Book of David, Chapter 1 by Robert Kent. That ebook is free to download as well. Coming up here on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast, stay tuned. We are going to be chatting with author Laura Martin early next week. She'll be our first ever. She was our first ever guest, and she'll be our first ever return guest. We'll be chatting with Sharon M. Draper, and we'll be chatting with author Dan Gutman. And then beyond that, we have many more exciting authors and publishing professionals lined up. If you want to keep up with the show and what's going on, as always, you can head to middlegradeninja.com. You'll see an entire listing of our scheduled appearances and everything else we've got going on in the world. So without further ado, today we are very excited. We're going to be chatting with author Allan Woodrow. Allan, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for clearing time from your schedule to be here today. I have very much been enjoying your book, The Curse of the Werepenguin. I'm very pumped to be able to talk to you about it today. If you would, just start by giving an esteemed audience kind of an overview of your background and how you got started writing and where you're at in your writing career now.
Sure. Well, I have been blessed as a professional writer for pretty much my entire career. I started off in advertising, as you mentioned, and did that for a long time as writing television commercials, radio commercials, print ads, billboards, websites, and down the line. Always had wanted to be an author. It had been a dream of mine ever since I was a little kid. But for many reasons, didn't pursue it, mostly the assumption that I would fail, and no one wants to fail. Who would want to read a book by me? Why am I good enough to be an author? So I kind of put those dreams and those hopes aside and concentrated on writing advertising, which was a way to write and make a living, as I love to write, but one that would be able to support my family. Then as I got older and I had kids and they were starting to read some pretty awesome stuff, some chapter books and early novels, and I was reading them with my kids and was really impressed by this whole genre of books and writing that I had been totally unaware of as an adult without kids. It's not something I gravitated toward, and certainly the types of books that are available today are not at all like they were when I was younger. So being exposed to these books really got me excited about writing for kids myself, and decided to take the plunge. And I've been very fortunate now to have nearly 30 books that have been published in the about 10 years since I first decided I was going to try to write a children's book.
Oh, you said 30 books in 10 years?
That's right. Now, not all under my name, only 8 or 9 of them under my name. I write under a few different pen names. I write for books based on some animated television shows. I write a number of educational leveled readers that go direct to classroom. Those usually don't have my name on them. They have a variety of different pen names that I use. But books with my own name on them, novels and such, there are, I think, 8 to date.
And so originally, before you rediscovered children's books with your children, did you want to write for adults?
You know, one of the reasons why I didn't pursue a career as an author was I didn't know what I wanted to write about. Through the years, I would try many different things. I'd write a horror story. I'd try to write an adventure story. I'd try to write something that was more realistic and never really found my voice. I would struggle with these things. I would try to write for a few weeks and put them aside and lose interest. And it really wasn't until I tried to write children's books that I really embraced it and found, wow, this is fun. This is something I can do. This is something I enjoy doing, something I can be passionate about. If I hadn't had kids, I probably never would have thought of writing children's books. So I owe my career to my kids, I guess. They exposed me to this whole world of children's books and really developed my passion for writing for them.
So what is it that, because at this point, 30 books, and I know not all of them are the Allan Woodrow children's books, but 9 of them are. What is it about writing for children that you love that keeps you coming back again and again to do more?
Most of my books are funny, at least hopefully, and I think I have a very sophomoric sense of humor. So first of all, my voice, I think, naturally gravitates toward that age group. I don't think I've grown up too much since I was in 4th grade. So writing for children's comes really just natural to me. Even if I try to write for older audiences, the language and the plots and the sentiments all sort of gravitate back toward being a kid. So really when I decided to write for kids, it all was a very natural progress. It wasn't something that was a stretch for me. It was something that really felt comfortable with the types of things I was already writing.
And when you're writing humor, do you crack yourself up? Do you find yourself laughing aloud there in the office by yourself?
I can't say I laugh out. Certainly things that I find funny and that make me feel warm inside, and I read them again, and I still have that feeling of warmth and happiness that humor can bring you. I'm not the sort that laughs out loud, even in conversation, although I just did. But no, I mean, nothing that I ever say to myself is so funny, I think, that makes me laugh out loud, but I will chuckle inside, I guess.
Well, I'm a bit of a narcissist. I'll sit at my desk and I'll laugh aloud. Like, oh, Kent, you've done it again, cracking me up. And that don't mind my wife walking into the office at that moment. But if I'm writing a sad scene and I'm kind of wiping a little bit of a tear, I don't want anybody to see that. That's my private time. I never cry in real life. But if I'm writing a story and I'm processing it in a nice, safe place where it's just me all alone, that's maybe a safe place to cry just a little bit. So if somebody were to walk into the office at that point, it'd be like walking in on me when I'm changing. Like, no, this is private. Let me finish my story.
Certainly movies and some books make me cry and laugh out loud, but I can't say my own work does. I've already kind of know what's coming. So it's not surprising me or shocking me in a way that would make me sad or laughing, because I'm already kind of in on the know, so to speak, with those things.
Well, I feel, like I say, appropriately narcissistic when it happens, because I can see myself from outside myself wiping a tear from my eye and saying, "Oh, dang it, I'm so good," and then I'm insufferable. I have to get away from myself at that point.
I would say I probably struggle more with the anti-narcissism. As like many writers, I'm constantly plagued with assumptions of self-doubt, and I'm a hack, and I'm fooling people with my writing and trying to constantly live up to overcoming those self-doubts. So much less of a narcissist than someone who's I'm not sure what the best word to use is as the anti-narcissist, but someone who definitely gears themselves more toward doubting than self-confidence and overconfidence.
Let's start there, because obviously 30 books in 10 years, somewhere in there you found a way to work through that and get over at least enough to get the thing on paper. So what was it that allowed you to get over your own self-doubt and start writing professionally?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, I wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. In fact, in 3rd grade, we had a project in school where we had to write a book. And it wasn't a book like you'd find in your library or bookshelves. It was a construction paper cover and had 8 really horribly written scribbles of pages and bad illustrations. I couldn't write or draw at all in 3rd grade, but I loved doing it. I decided right then in 3rd grade that I was going to grow up to become an author. So I even have it written down from a 3rd grade newsletter that was sent around school, what you wanted to be when you grew up. And I wrote I wanted to be a writer. So something I wanted to do. However, I continued to write and practice. I knew that to get good at anything, right, you got to practice. So I wrote all through elementary school, middle school, and high school. And I wanted to be a writer. And I was going to college, and I thought to myself, I can't be a writer. I'm not going to. Who's going to want to read an Allan Woodrow book? That's just crazy. That's a waste of time. I'm going to do something more practical. In the back of my head was still this voice that said, Allan, write. You want to be a writer. So I went into advertising, as I mentioned, and I wrote, and I kept on trying to write books, never found my voice. And every time I found something I liked, don't write. And so many years kids, and I was reading their stuff, and I thought, wow, I really like children's books. Maybe I should try to ignore that voice in my head that said, Allan, you're not good enough. Allan, you're going to fail. And I should try. And what's the worst that can happen? But if I've had this voice in my head for decades telling me to write, and I've listened to it, I can continue to listen to it, and I could never write, or I could finally decide to take that plunge that I've been promising myself I would take since I was in 3rd grade. So ignoring that voice and teaching myself that, Allan, it's okay to fail. It's okay to not succeed was, to me, the biggest part of the process for me. Just making that decision to try and not being scared of failure was the deciding factor that helped me become a writer. I might have continued my rest of my life listening to that voice and never succeeding. And it took a lot of self-motivation and a lot of perseverance and a lot of struggling to make that voice go away. But finally I did. But that voice still raises its head every now and then. It still speaks to me as I'm writing anything. It reminds me, Allan, you're not good enough. Allan, what are you doing? And I'm fighting that voice, pushing it away to continue to write. But fortunately, I've had enough successes that I can speak pretty well to that voice and tell it to go away with some fairly well self-assurance that that voice isn't going to take over my life anymore, but certainly it's still there and it'll probably always be there. And I think part of the reason why I've been successful is because I have that voice, and I'm not so confident in my own writing that I'm relying on my writing to be good enough. I'm revising and going back and forth, revising constant times on my work to make it better, to constantly prove to myself that I am good enough. And that's certainly one of the reasons why I've been successful.
I think the proof is in the pudding. While I'm crying at my own brilliance here, revising and working harder, it's paying off. So even now, 30 books in, you're still hearing that voice and still having to have that battle. It doesn't go away.
I don't think it ever goes away. I don't know if I want it to go away. As I mentioned, I think it elevates my writing. If I was so self-confident that my writing was genius, I might not push myself to go beyond, to do that 10th revision, 9 revisions, to spend that extra few hours on a Sunday night making that scene perfect rather than saying, that scene is pretty good. But it's that constant struggle and battle to make it better, to prove to myself that that voice is not going to win out. That helps me become successful and has helped my writing tremendously.
And is that a battle you've had to have in other areas of your life where you've had to gain up your confidence? I'm not going to be an advertiser. No, I'm going to do advertising. Or is it just writing where it rears its ugly head?
I think it's probably there in many things, but certainly writing is the number one thing. I don't have a lack of self-confidence in a lot of other things that I do, whether it's playing games or whether it's meeting people or having relationships or doing non-writing work. I usually am pretty confident that I'm successful at those things. So it's mostly pinpointed at my writing. And maybe that's because writing is what I'm so passionate about. it matters to me, my writing, and something that doesn't maybe is important to me, maybe doesn't cause me to out those things. Not that relationships and social aspects and things aren't important to me, but just in a different way.
Oh, sure. No, I absolutely 100% understand. I have a wife and a child, and I love them very much. And I sometimes wonder, why am I so focused on this story that I'm working on that means so very much to me, when I have all this wonderfulness in my life? I could just put it in the corner and walk away and go live my life. And then, nope, it calls me right back. I think it might be a sickness. One of those things that when I talk with young writers, I'm like, look, if I could talk you out of writing, be talked out of it. You weren't that serious anyway, because the real writers can't stop. It matters that much to them. They have to get in there and they have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true for me. As I mentioned, and I was a kid, right? And I was 8 years old. I wanted to be a writer, and I've always had that passion in me. It's not something that reared up and I could try this, maybe see what works. It was something I had to do. And even though I didn't write for a long time because I was convinced that I wouldn't succeed, that voice was still there telling me, Allan, try, write. And again, overcoming that voice of failure was really important to me, and really spurred me to whatever success that I've been fortunate enough to have. But if I didn't have that passion and that desire to write, I probably wouldn't have been able to ignore that voice. It was really a combination of that urge to write that helped me overcome that fear of failure that I had.
And I suspect that there are probably a number of people who are watching or listening who maybe will find themselves with some. I'm sure everybody that's watching or listening has self-doubt, unless they're a sociopath. There's going to be some level of self-doubt in there. So that day one, when you finally say, okay, I'm going to stop listening to this voice, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write something. What does that finally look like? How do you get yourself in front of the computer? How many words are you shooting for? What does that look like when you finally say, the heck with the voice of say, I'm doing this?
Well, I made that decision, which was actually my New Year's resolution in 2009. So 2009, I had never written children before. I never tried to, but New Year's 2009, I made a resolution. I was going to write a children's book. And I gave myself 5 years to finish a book and to find an agent or find someone interested in that book. But I also knew that I was going to finally embrace this challenge that I had ignored for so long. I couldn't just do it, helter skelter. I needed to be serious about it. So not only was it a decision to ignore that voice, but it was a decision to take that goal, that resolution, seriously, and to give 100%. Because I knew that if I, after not having done it for so long, if I just did it, just kind of died and failed, that wouldn't have necessarily justified all this waiting. So I decided that if I was going to do anything in life, let's say I wanted to be an electrician. I know nothing about electronics, so that's a good thing to choose. I couldn't just take apart my television set or rewire my house. I would have to know what I was doing. I'd have to study, I'd have to read up on it, maybe take some classes. And I decided I needed to do the same thing. I couldn't just write a children's book without having known nothing about writing children's books, because other than reading them, I never tried or really did anything. I was as green and as ignorant about the process as anyone could possibly be. So I took some classes. I read some books on how to write children's books. I immersed myself. I joined the SEBWI, which Rob, I'm sure you're familiar with, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, was a great organization. I took advantage of their resources so that if I was going to try to write a children's book, I was going to give 100% to write a children's book. And one of those aspects of trying 100% was I knew I had to write every single day. When you talk to people who want to be writers, you often ask them, people all over the place want to be a writer and write a book. And so it's very common to have a conversation with someone and they say, yeah, I've been writing a book for 10 years, for 20 years, and I'm still working on it. And you realize the reason someone works on a book for 10 years or 20 years is because they're not writing every day. And it's easy to take a day off and then say, I don't want to feel like writing today. And then The next day comes, yeah, I didn't write yesterday. I'm not going to feel like writing today either. And all of a sudden it's been a week or a month or 2 months and you haven't written. Because I was in that spiral for a long time and I wasn't seriously taking the opportunity to write. I was convinced I wouldn't. So I would use excuses not to write. So part of that resolution was the decision to write every single day, Monday through Sunday. 7 days a week, and I found a time. I had a different time Monday through Friday that I did Saturdays and Sundays, but I always found at least a half hour, but usually an hour or even longer to write every single day. And the thing is, when you write every single day, whether you write 500 words or 1,000 words, if you write 1,000 words every day for 3 months, you will have a very long novel. Regardless, it might not be a very good novel, but you'll have something. It's impossible to write every single day on something not to eventually finish it. And so I found by writing every day, I was very productive. I was writing books. I was getting things done. I was educating myself in the process. So the achievement of writing a book is not just the decision, hey, I'm going to write a book, because lots of people have that decision. It's the dedication that this is not a hobby. This is something I'm going to take as seriously as I would any other aspect of my life that I want to be successful in. And making that decision to do that is why I was able to become pretty successful pretty quickly. Did not take a long time for me to find an agent and a book contract. It all came pretty quick. One of those reasons is because I'd been a professional advertising writer for many years, so I knew how to write. It wasn't like I was starting from scratch. But also dedicating myself every day to producing work. It's made me better. It made me become what I am. And I still write every day, 7 days a week. In the 10 years since I first made the decision I was going to write, I've probably missed maybe 10 days in 10 years writing. I still try to write every single day.
Wow, that's real dedication. I try to write most every day, but I don't know that I could make that claim of only missing 10 days in 10 years. It'd probably be a bit higher. I don't know if I could make that claim of missing only 10 days in 1 year.
Vacations and the family's annoyed that I'm bringing my laptop with me, and I say, you guys have to go out for lunch. I can't go with you. I put my hour in. But I find, again, if I miss a day, it's easy to miss multiple days. So if I don't let myself skip a day, then I know I'll be productive and I know I'll get my work done.
So how do you know if you've had a productive day? What makes you feel that, yes, that was a good morning, my hour writing? Do you have a word count you strive for, or a scene, a chapter?
I generally try to write it depends on where in the process I'm in the book, because if I don't have an idea, my productive day might be just thinking of a couple of plot points in a book. If I'm in a first draft stage, a great day may be writing a chapter. If I'm in a revision stage, it might be revising 10 pages or 20 pages. So I have different expectations depending on where I am in a book, but I generally have expectations, and sometimes that takes a half hour. Sometimes it takes more than that. I try to balance my time so I don't get my work done in my allotted amount of time for the day. I will come back and work later. My schedule's pretty tight, so I don't have a whole lot of flexibility, but I can go to bed later, or I can take less time watching a Netflix movie or something. So I can find, if I really, really want to, I could usually find the time. But what's successful really depends on what I am currently doing and what the process is on the book.
And then how about with your, okay, so the hour can be writing, revising, whatever it is that needs to be done. Does research count?
It would generally do a lot of, most of my books are fiction, and most of my books are kind of zany, or certainly are at least based on experiences that are similar to what I've had. So I don't do historical fiction, for example. So my books tend to not need a lot of research. And if I'm writing something and I will need to know some information for that scene or for that dialogue or for a character's backstory, I will do the research. And yes, I would consider that part of that time.
And then how about your reading habits? Are you a must read every day, or?
I certainly read every day. I think all authors love to read. They love, I love the written word, whether I'm writing it or someone else is writing it. And I think for any author, reading is a critical component. And I'll use the analogy of anyone who is passionate about something probably enjoys doing as much as they do listening or watching. If you love to dance, you probably really enjoy watching dancers. And you don't just enjoy it from an entertainment perspective. You enjoy learning. You see the moves they make and you want to emulate those moves that inspire you to become a better dancer. Or if you're a musician, you probably listen to a lot of music and maybe you want to play the same chords that you're hearing, or maybe you want to try that song, or maybe it inspires you to create your own song or your own type of music or your own type of phrasing. And the same thing with, at least with me, when I read things for entertainment value, certainly, but I also pick up things. I get scared. I go, wow, how did that writer do that? I would love to how they scared people, or how do they make me, like Robert, you mentioned you cry. How did that writer make me cry? What did they do? The scene they did leading up to that, how did they make that scene compelling? Was sad. And then when my own writing, maybe I will take some of those hints with me. I think all artists borrow from other artists, and I'm certainly not shy to admit that a lot of my books are inspired by certain things or certain phrasings or certain elements that other authors use. And if I wasn't reading constantly, I couldn't bring those things to my own writing. So I love writing myself. I love reading what other people have written, not only for just the joy of reading, but for the aspects of helping me in my own writing.
Makes sense. So if you can see other writers doing things well, or in some cases not so well, then that gives you an idea of what you need to do to make better your own work, right?
For sure. And it's as a writer, there are certain writers whose work touches me more, maybe more similar to my style, or writers that I am impressed with, or writers that go, wow, I could never write something like that. And it amazes you, just like anyone. If you see someone doing something that you didn't think, wow, that's above what I could do, or just different from what I can do, then that really helps you internalize your own writing and helps you understand where you're coming from as well. So there's a lot of things that as a writer, I learn from other writers, and that can improve me as an artist in all kinds of different ways.
I want to dig in here to the Curse of the Werepenguin, because I've got lots of questions for you about this book. But I did want to ask you just one more question about just you, because you're the only author I can think of to ask this. And what is the deal with the hat? Because every author photo I've ever seen of you, except I think the first photo from Middle Grade Ninja when Zachary Ruthless came out forever ago, you've got your hat on. Every time I see you at a conference or an event, you're walking around with the hat. So what's the deal with the author hat?
So there's actually a story behind it. So as an author, especially as an up-and-coming author, you get invited to signings. And some of these author signings are catalog calls where like 30 authors are crammed into a room, and you're all trying to get noticed and get your book sold and signed. And usually at these events, there'll be one or two headliners. And there'll be 100 people deep for the headliner's autograph, and the other 30 authors are standing around with no one visiting you, and you're looking jealously at that headliner, and you're looking at your neighbor next to you and commiserating and feeling a little unpopular. So I was early on, I had a pen name, and one of my pen names, I was invited to go to one of these catalog call signings under my pen name. And for my pen name, I was just using a silhouette of someone with a big mustache and a hat. I thought I should go as that character, not as myself. So I got a hat that fit that kind of silhouette. I went to a costume store and I bought a big handlebar mustache, the good kind, the kind that you have mustache glue on, so it would look somewhat official. And I had an old black fence as a Halloween. Still had, and I wore this, and I went and I talked in a really weird, like I can't do voices well. I did a high-pitched British accent that went in and out. It was a disaster. But I sat in on this thing, and I was the one with 100 people, probably because I was talking so weird and looked so odd. And I could see everyone else was staring at me, jealous. All of a sudden, I was the headliner, and who the heck knew who I was, because I had a book that no one had known and had just come out. So but one of the problems was the mustache kept on falling off. It was so hot. I was wearing a hat and a heavy trench coat, and the mustache kept on falling off with sweat. So I had one hand holding up the mustache and another hand signing books and dripping sweat. It was a miserable experience, other than the fact I had a very popular table. And I had thought to myself, wow, I should, for Allan Woodrow signings, I need to do something as cool as that. But again, because I was so hot and miserable, I wasn't going to do the mustache or the trench coat, but I could do the hat. And in advertising, it's all about marketing and having an identifiable persona. So I quickly embraced the idea of a hat. And I now wear a hat every time I'm at an author function. But for my very first book, I hadn't discovered the hat yet. But the rest of my life, I don't wear a hat. So if you see me wearing the hat, I'm probably officially an author at a signing or a podcast or at a school visit, but just sitting around the house, generally I'm not wearing a hat.
So is that kind of like, this is a very middle grade show to bring up, but is that kind of like Breaking Bad? Walter White's got the hat that he puts on and becomes Heisenberg. When you put the hat on, do you become Allan Woodrow, author, here to talk author stuff?
It does not have a transfiguration property. So I put on the hat, I don't really act much differently than, unlike my original pen name when I had a whole different persona, I don't become a ruthless, drug dealer like in Breaking Bad, and I don't become anyone other than myself.
No, that would be it would be an odd thing to do on the side of writing children's books.
Yeah, don't mesh well, those two occupations.
With the background in advertising, I definitely want to talk with you more about how that influences you with your author career and how that influences you in book marketing. But I want to tease it. I want to say, hey, there are authors who are listening and you want marketing advice and advertising advice. We're absolutely going to talk with Allan about it. But first, we're going to talk about The Curse of the Werepenguin, because I love this book. This absolutely cracked me up. So let's start here and we'll circle back for the rest of it. But if you would, I'm terrible about summarizing other people's books. So if you would just give the esteemed audience a bit of a summary of what is The Curse of the Werepenguin all about.
Well, Bolt Waddle is a 12-year-old orphan who has always wanted a family, but unfortunately, as a 12-year-old orphan, to be as an orphan, his future opportunities did not look great until he is surprisingly adopted by a mysterious baron in the faraway country of Bulgaria. Bolt excitedly goes to this faraway country, only to discover that things are not quite as awesome as he thought, because the baron turns into a evil penguin at midnight. And when he bites Bolt, Bolt has only 3 days to reverse the curse or be a werepenguin for eternity. So it's a true story based loosely on facts, but I took some licenses here and there.
I mean, that's apart from the part about the werepenguin, which obviously is 100% true.
Well, of course. I mean, werewolves get all the press. Where aardvarks get very little attention, where termites, probably because they're so small, no one really pays attention to. Again, where penguins, unless you're living in those pockets of the world where penguins frequent and plunder and loot fisheries, you probably don't know that much about where penguins either. But yeah, there's a whole litany of where creatures. But in the United States, certainly, and in Western civilization, where wolves seem to get all the attention, but I don't know if that's justified.
Why was it just right to it? This is almost akin to asking a writer, where do you get your ideas? Which I know is a terrible question because most authors don't know. They just kind of come. But why was a werepenguin ideal for you out of all those were creatures that you could have written a book about? What made you settle on a werepenguin?
Yeah, and that's gonna be a tough one because I'm not sure. I very first sat down, it was a were aardvark, but I only wrote like a page. of that, and I didn't like the Were Aardvark. And I think I was watching Happy Feet and maybe March of the Penguins around that time. And penguins are joyful, happy creatures that people love. So if you're going to mix a beloved creature that people don't consider to be dangerous, certainly, carnivorous, with a monster, then penguins are a great option. You could do, you could do a were panda bear, perhaps. There's a few other animals, a were kitten, but cats can be dangerous. So kittens, outgrow them. So there's not that many really awesome animals to choose from, but a were penguin just seemed perfect. Also, there are some lessons, morals, I would say, in the book about the importance of family. Penguins are one of the unique creatures where a mother and a father will mate for life and have a chick together and share the care of that chick and take turns sitting on that egg. So it also worked really well for developing a horror story, but also one with heart.
It's in that sense, it's a perfect creature because immediately, just within the title, it gives you a sense of the type of book that you're going to get. There's going to be a humorous book, and there's a laugh every page, almost throughout. But there are some elements from classic horror stories that are kind of turned on their head, and it's never too scary because at the end of the day, one, it's humorous throughout, but two, it's a were penguin. I would be hard pressed to imagine the child that would be terrified of the of the were penguin. Maybe they're out there. Maybe you're getting letters from their parents. Dear Mr. Ryder, my child couldn't sleep last night. Have you?
I haven't gotten any complaints. Any complaints yet on making the book too scary, because that was certainly something I was aware of. Though I had some scenes that were a little more graphic. I wanted to avoid them. Again, knowing my audience, you wouldn't want to make anything too disturbing. But then again, if you make it too soft, there's no tension. So that was one of the challenges with writing a book, is writing a horror story that was scary-ish, but not so frightening that the audience might get nightmares dreaming of penguins attacking them and stealing their fish from their freezer, or whatever horrors they could imagine that penguins might do to them.
I was looking. There's several good examples. One that struck me is without spoiling. There is a gang of bandits that's introduced relatively early in the story, and they show up and they're planning to do some kidnapping and some ransoming. I won't say who they're planning to kidnap, but they undercut that because that's a source of income. But they also hold a bake sale, and so right away you go, okay. Well, these bandits probably aren't too tremendously dangerous if they're also selling baked goods. We'll be all right.
Yeah, their pumpkin strudel actually is probably their biggest seller. Not that that's necessarily important for the book, but yeah, their baking skills are quite adept.
There's a lot of fun names within the story, most notably the main character, Bolt Waddle, because he's at least for a portion of the story, one of his go-to action is to run away. So Bolt, perfect name. Not all the names are so on point, but where do you typically, how do you come up with your names? How do you decide what to name the characters?
So there's a variety of things. And for example, in the Curse of the Werepenguin, you specifically mentioned Bolt. Bolt is short for Humboldt, and Humboldt is a species of penguin. So when I was looking to name him, I was reading up on penguins. A lot of times my characters might have a name that's derived from a real word or derived from a translation of a foreign language that means that word. And a Humboldt penguin being a type of penguin, that of all the names of the penguins seemed like the one that fit the character most. And of course, Bolt can be used from Humboldt. And I knew that I wanted a character not who is bold and fearless, and though thus becomes a penguin, is able to fight people because he's so naturally brave. But on the other side, on the contrary, I wanted a character who was scared, who had to overcome not only this horrible creature, but his own internal fears. So someone who ran away from danger, and the fact that Humboldt could be shortened to Bolt, all this worked really well together. But I found the name Humboldt as a species of penguin before I realized that it could be shortened to Bolt, which all this worked really well. And other characters, again, it depends on the character. Some people may be inspired by other names. As the head of the bandit clan is Vigilanda, who his name is inspired from a name from a different book. I don't think anyone ever would realize that connection, but lots of things come from just random things in my head that make sense to me, but not always easy to follow those threads.
And who was the ideal reader for this story?
Well, the ideal reader is someone who's really rich and wants to buy 1,000 copies of the book. I think if I can get 10 people to buy 1,000 copies each, I'm done. But assuming that no one wants 1,000
any
copies,
podcasters that you are interviewed by.
that's my goal. Right. One person, 1 million copies, buys them all. I'll retire. But assuming that doesn't happen, as you mentioned, as we've mentioned, it's a middle grade book, which means 8 to 12 to 13 years old is the ideal audience. But really, when I write books, I write them books that make me happy and that I like, and I think anyone who at any age would enjoy it. So you don't have to be a 9-year-old boy. You can be someone my age and still laugh and still enjoy the book. So yeah, the ideal age, that 3rd through 7th, 8th grade age group. But I wouldn't say that anyone would be too old to laugh at the humor. A great example, and one of the greatest books is Princess Bride, which you see the movie, and maybe it's a kid movie, but it's rich and it's laughing. Anyone at any age can enjoy it. So I hate to compare my book with a classic. Certainly lots of a book that is good for kids, and there's lots of great books for kids that are also great for adults. So when I write, I hope that my books can strike a chord with you, no matter where you're at, and whether you're in school or out.
Well, they can slap this on the cover of the paperback if they want. Princess Bride is garbage compared to the Curse of the Werepenguin. Rob Kent, middle grade ninja. Put that right up front.
I missed that. So thank you. That's high praise. Certainly for me, if I'm looking at the pantheon of great humorous children's books, Princess Bride is near the top.
Well, thinking about it, I did want to ask you about some of the blurbs here that are on your cover, because you've got the best of the best on here. You've got Chris Grabenstein, you've got Chris Rylander, you've got Adam Rex, and then my favorite is this quote from Baron Chordata, who says, "This book is full of lies and slander. Do not repeat it, or I will hang you from a flagpole by your armpit hairs and raise you up and down for a week." Well, he would think that, wouldn't he? For those who are uninitiated, Baron Chateau is a character within the story, so it's wonderful that he's also got his blurb on there. But for the others, how did you go about getting such wonderful blurbs from such amazing authors?
It's amazing what blackmail will do to you, and if you just find, you can dig up all kinds of dirt on people, use that, and all of a sudden they're sending you money, they're writing blurbs for your books. It's pretty amazing what a little internet research can do. No, I can't take credit for finding those blurbs. My publisher, my agent, reached out to people they knew who they thought would enjoy reading the book. And they shared an early version of my book with these awesome writers, and they volunteered to write blurbs for the book. But I didn't have any personal involvement in that. I wish I did. That would have had, all kinds of different people also joining the fray.
I had a couple of blurbs early on. I had one from Richard Adams, the author of Watership Down, and I had one from my buddy Mike Mullen, the author of Ashfall. And then, after that, I asked a couple of other authors, and they just looked at me like I had just committed the most egregious sin. Oh, you made it dirty. Why would you ask me that? And then after that, I never asked anybody again. I said, nope, there's no blurb that's worth that feeling of, of being that idiot having asked for it. So when I see a great blurb, I'm always curious. Did you have to have that in person contact and ask him real nice from the bottom of your heart? But it sounds like you were spared that. You just were the fortunate recipient of an outstanding publisher.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, that's true.
Let's talk. Have some other questions just about the story. Trying to think where the best spot to decide would be. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was the opening and closing again, without spoiling. It opens very classic horror story. We've got characters that are not, so far as we know, main characters within the story. We've got a gentleman who's come to visit the zoo, and well, on some other purpose, it's St. Abe's Zoo, and he's a first-person narrator who's being told both stories. So why? At what point did you make that decision on day one when you started the story, or was that afterward, or somewhere in the middle? How did that come to be, and why is this first-person perspective that's not Bolt or that's not our protagonist? Why is that the best spot to start a story like this?
That was actually that was not a revision change. That was the very first thing I wrote was that narrator. So that was part of my vision the entire time. And there were some plot points for that. The narrator himself is not necessarily a protagonist or in this first book, but he will come into play. There's 3 books, and they come into play later in the series. There was lots of different reasons, but I really am a fan of books where there's a narrator who kind of inserts them into the narrative, whether it's Lemony Snicket. Obviously, he plays a much bigger role in those books than just a narrator at the beginning and end of the book. But I'm a big fan of books where a narrator is inserted a little bit, his personality comes into the book and maybe influences the choices of the storytelling. But the mystery of who this person is and how he knows the story is something that I plan to reveal eventually. I didn't know necessarily there'd be sequels to this book when I wrote it. I did have a longer vision in my head, but didn't know how to be fortunate enough to tell that story. So he was inserted to some extent as a hope he'll come into play later, but really just a narrative device that I felt really worked well to kind of intrigue the readers and kind of play off some ideas I might have later.
So I know, obviously, at the back of the book, we're promised Revenge of the Werepenguin is coming soon. So the publisher definitely owes us that. You promised. It's in here. At what point in the process did you know that, yes, indeed, there were going to be sequels, so you had some room to breathe and expand your story?
So it wasn't until after this first book was written and the publisher had agreed to release it that they came to me and they said, Allan, we would love to continue the Werepenguin story. Do you have any ideas of where this could go? And my answer was, I definitely do. In fact, I'm so glad you asked, because I have I have kind of a whole sequence of events in my head that will come into play. So that's awesome that I can tell my entire story. So at that point, I began developing that structure around those ideas more carefully. But it really didn't come into solid fruition until much closer to the publication date of the book, maybe 6 to 8 months before the book was going to be released, which was just released a few weeks ago, did that all come into play.
And when can esteemed audience look forward to purchasing their copy of Revenge of the Werepenguin?
Revenge of the Werepenguin will be out next summer. I don't think there is a release date. August 2020 right now is the target month. But again, not a date specifically has been set in stone. Then again, there'll be a third book, likely about a year later after that.
Gotcha. So, Curse of the Three Penguin, or some. I assume we're not able to reveal the title here at this point. That's
the third book now. no, that's I do a title for it, but it's not in stone yet.
Got you. And then so when you're writing a book, do you always have some idea in the back of your mind that there could be a sequel, and then you're comfortable just walking away after the first if for some reason a sequel is not warranted? Or is it just some books have sequels and others don't?
Generally, it depends on the book. Not all the books that I write have obvious sequels. Usually when you write something, you start embracing the characters and you envision what their bigger life beyond this book. What have they done after last chapter is done, after it says the end? What do they do next? I think that's part of anyone's thought process. You love the people you're writing about. You feel real. It feel like family. So you think about their journey beyond the pages of the book, and sometimes that journey is compelling enough that, wow, that could be a story. That is something that I would love to share. And sometimes that journey is really uninteresting and wouldn't lend itself to a book. But I think most of my characters, I know what happens to them after the final chapter is done. It's just a matter of, do I have the opportunity or to tell that story? And does anyone want to know that story? Because if all they did after the book ended was have lunch the next day, that's not going to be necessarily a compelling narrative.
Have lunch, take a nap, call it a day.
Exactly.
And then this is a very funny book just throughout. What is the secret for writing humor for kids, or for anybody? Because I laugh.
That's something that I have been asked before and that I cannot answer. I try to write things that I don't think are funny, and I can't. I always have to throw in a joke. I have to take a askance view of the scene and make it more fun. Every time I try to write something that's serious, to me, it doesn't come out across as good, then I just have to throw in some jokes. So I think just my writing style lends itself to humor, even if I don't intend at the start to add humor to it. And then what makes me laugh doesn't necessarily make you laugh, but hopefully it does. I think I have a fairly universal sense of humor. So if I think something's funny, I think generally speaking, most people find it funny too. But really, I write to make myself giggle. And even if I'm not giggling out loud, right, I'm giggling to myself. Unlike you, Mr. Narcissist, who's laughing out loud uproariously when he's writing, I'm chuckling inside. But my writing really has to make me smile, or it just comes across to me as not finished.
Yep, nope, that's me. Brilliant! Ah, you've done it again. There's a kind of half deranged moment. If anybody's seen the newest version of Murder on the Orient Express, where Kenneth Branagh is playing Hercule Poirot, and they're playing up his love of Charles Dickens, but when you see him reading, he's on his bunk and he's got the book and he's just laughing as loud as he possibly can, annoying the other passengers in the train and yelling out, "Oh, Mr. Dickens!" And that's how I like to imagine myself when I'm reading my own books. So with humor, I mean, obviously, it's a little bit like asking, I don't know, how do you do magic? I don't know. You just do it past a certain point. But do you find that the better jokes come in the revision after you've got something on paper, a draft or two?
For sure. When I go back and I find scenes to be not very compelling or interesting, I'll throw in a joke. Back in grade school, I was a kid who thought of a really funny comeback in class 30 seconds after it would have been appropriate to yell it out. So the teacher says something, I got nothing. 10 seconds later, I think of a great comeback, but that time the teacher's already into algebra and I've lost my opportunity. So the great thing about writing books is that 30 seconds is perfectly fine. No one's rushing me to tell a joke. Usually I'll write a scene and I go back to it and revision, and I'll think of all these funny things while I'm reading what I wrote that I can add to it. But my first drafts are usually not, first of all, they're not very well written. I do not write first drafts well. It takes me multiple drafts to make my writing not be horrible. But also, as I'm adding layers, generally the jokes just kind of come.
And how many drafts are you typically looking at for a given project now that you're 30 books in, and the Allan Woodrow?
Anywhere from 8 to 12, I guess. My very first books are about 30. My very first book, I think there was 30 plus 35 revisions that I did. And now I can get in under 10 if I'm really good, but it kind of depends on the first draft. I've written some first drafts I think are pretty good, so then they still need 7 or 8 revisions. And other times I write a draft I don't think is any good at all, and might need a few more go-arounds. But when I say a revision, it's hard to necessarily say what constitutes a revision, because I save old drafts. Sometimes a revision is an entire work through from beginning to end. Sometimes a revision might be changing one character. Maybe I don't like that character anymore, I want to take him out, or maybe I want to give her some different personality traits. So the level of rewriting for each draft changes dramatically, and I have no real way of quantitating exactly how much rewriting means a manuscript has been revised, because it's all over the place.
So if we're talking, 10, 12 anymore, does that include the drafts that then after you submit it to your agent and the publisher? Does that include those drafts, or is that just you before you open the door for other people to come in?
There's me before I open the door for other people to come in. Usually there'll be 2 drafts after that. Sometimes just 1. It sort of depends. But 2 is I think once I had 3, and but generally speaking, 2. The first one being somewhat significant. There'll be a bunch of different plot points and things that the editor discovers that really things will enhance the story that maybe I hadn't considered, and often I'll agree with those, and that might alter things in different places too. Then after that, usually the changes are fairly superficial. There'll be another round later on with a copy editing, meaning someone has proofread it. My grammar is not 100% perfect. I need spell check, or a lot of my words are misspelled, and so the copy editing phase is awesome for me, because people can find a lot of small little things that I didn't notice. Even if I spend hours poring over the page trying to find every single little mistake, there'll still be mistakes in there. I think the human brain kind of works that way. Once you make one mistake, it kind of glosses over that mistake in future revisions, versus a fresh pair of eyes that can immediately spot some things that you might never be able to spot no matter how many times you look at the manuscript.
And then, are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you sit down and draft out your plot points? How much planning do you do before you get started?
I am a significant plotter. And that goes back to when I first started to write and made that decision to become a writer. I had a full-time job, and as an advertising writer, and I only had a small pocket of time during the day. My kids were little, so they would go to bed by 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I would go to bed by 11. So I had, for when they went to bed and when I went to bed, to write. And I discovered pretty quickly that if I didn't sit down and know exactly what I wanted to write that day, I would be staring at my computer screen for almost the entire time, not doing anything productive. So finally, I think of an idea, and I started thinking of the idea, and then it was time to go to bed. So I knew immediately I needed to be disciplined and know exactly what I was going to write before I sat down, so that I could be productive and use that time. So my very first book, after trying not to, I caved in and plotted the whole thing, and I found writing the book went so much faster, so much better, so much smoother. And to this day, now I can't sit down and write anything without having plotted the entire book. My plots are long. I'll have a 50-page outline of my book before I sit down and write it. And that 50 pages might include snippets of dialogue. It might include snippets of descriptions. So as I'm writing the overview, I will have ideas for jokes or other things, and I'll kind of put them in. So that's why it's 50 pages long. But without that phase, I would just be staring at my computer like a deer with headlights, not getting anything done.
50 pages, that's almost like a first draft, almost, right?
Yeah, I don't consider when I mentioned my revisions, I don't consider a revision because it's not written in a narrative form. There's no point of view to it. But I guess you could kind of consider it one. As I write the novel, certain things might change from the outline, of course. There may be some things I didn't notice the characters bring on their own personality and flaws. There's something that sounded good in the one sentence outline, but now that I'm writing a page about it, it doesn't quite make sense. So the outline is a living outline. But when I make a change in the manuscript, I usually will go back and make it on the outline because often these things will have an avalanche effect, right? If I make one change on one page, that may affect how characters react and change going forward. So I don't want to have a big dilemma when I'm writing about, wait, how can I write this? This made no sense with the change over there. So the outline is constantly being revised as I think of new ideas.
And then how detailed are you getting? I mean, do you know where your chapter is going to begin and end? So you've got your, your, if not your cliffhanger, your whatever it is that's going to make sure esteemed reader can't put your book down before they get to the next chapter?
I do. I mean, yes, I know exactly where it's going to end. I know the title of every chapter. I've numbered the chapters. I've titled them. Again, the description could be 2 sentences. The description could be a page and a half. Most of my outlines are not 50 pages long. They have 1 or 2 have been. Usually they're around half that. Usually around 25 pages long. But still, a 25-page outline for a 300-page book is a fairly considerable template to be used to write the book going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I assume that comes in handy for revision as well. Then, if you're updating the outline as you go, and you're trying to figure out where you're at in the back of the book, and you want to revise something, if you've got that 25-page document where you can go and you can see the entire macro of your story, I assume that comes in handy throughout the process, right?
Yeah, I'll go back and I'll revise the outline first, and I'll color code it. So maybe this round, everything I'm changing from the first outline will be in red or in blue. So then when I go back to that chapter, I can see, okay, these things are changing structurally in this chapter. Now I'm going to write that chapter, and I'm going to address those elements and keep the other elements where they are. I will then do a complete read through the entire manuscript to make sure that changes are all kind of working together. But that is a big time saver and allows me to revise, I think, faster than some other people might revise because it's all fairly organized. There's always the drawback in that one of the great things about writing is the sense of discovery. You're writing new things and you're discovering it with the reader. When you outline, that sense of discovery is somewhat removed, which makes the actual writing process a little less fun. It can be again, but that's one of the reasons why I can bring these things to life. I can add humor, I can add jokes, I can add all these filler things and still have that sense of discovery and that sense of newness and that sense of interest that propels me to continue to want to be involved in rewriting the book and making all those extra revisions.
Makes sense. I like to outline as I go. So after I finish a chapter, I'll make sure I update my outline, and I'll have like what I call a grocery list where I've got these plot points I want to make sure I hit, and I usually know my ending. But I did find that the one time I wrote a really detailed outline, like we're talking 30 plus pages, I wrote it all out ahead of time. I never actually wrote the book. So nope, I wrote the story. It's good. I love that outline. I'm done with this.
Yeah, so I can tell you a story that's exactly relevant to that. So I was in my early 20s and I was working for an advertising agency, and I'd gone to Los Angeles we were filming some TV commercials, and I was at the bar of the hotel by myself. I don't remember why the rest of the crew wasn't there. Maybe they all went to bed. I was, again, 24. I sat down at the bar, and I was by myself, and struck a conversation with a gentleman who was next to me who was an author. And he had written a book that I'd heard of. Actually, I hadn't heard of the book, but I had seen the movie the book was based on. And I told him at the time that, hey, wow, that's awesome that you're an author. I want to be an author someday. I didn't know it would take me so many years from that point to actually become the author. But I asked, I said, one of the problems is I keep on starting things and I never finish them. I start them, I lose my interest. And he said, I know exactly what you mean. I have some advice. When you have an idea, don't tell anyone that idea, until you've finished writing it. Because as soon as you tell someone your story, you've already told the story, and all the passion of telling it for the first time is going to be gone. And I've taken that to heart, and no matter what I'm working on, I don't share anything about that story, about that book, until completely done. So part of that is the same thing with revision. If I'm writing an outline, I've already told the story. It does take that excitement out of writing it the first time. So I certainly can understand where you're coming from. But I find that even by verbally telling that's an extra added stage that makes it even harder. So I don't mention anything about anything to anyone until I'm completely finished with it. But also the outlining stage does, to some extent, robs that newness, that energy that you get from telling from the very first time.
Obviously, my next question is, what are you working on currently? Can you tell us the details of the story?
I'm writing book 3 of the Werepenguin trilogy. It's not done yet, so I'm in the middle of writing that. Again, it's outlined, but actually, usually my outlines are pretty good. And I was halfway through the manuscript, and I realized the outline wasn't working. So I had to go back. And redo the entire outline. It makes more sense now. And so I'm still in my very, first draft of Werepenguin 3. And since I've got 9 more drafts to write at least, I'll be in the Werepenguin world for quite a bit more time.
I find something similar if I'm working on usually if it's a horror story or if it's a brand new thing in the middle grade world that I haven't done before. I don't want to tell anybody about it for that same reason that I sometimes won't even tell Mrs. Kent what I'm up to other than I wrote today. What'd you do? It was writing. How was your day, dear? we'll just hurry that along. But at the moment, I'm still revising and working on Banneker Bones 3, so I'm a little bit more open to discussion because there's some things that, third book in the series, I know some things that are definitely going to happen. There's definitely going to be some action sequences. Banneker and his buddy Ellicott are definitely going to have to do some battle with some monsters because that's what they do. So I'm a little more comfortable talking about that. And
my family knows better than to ask me anything about my writing because I won't tell them. So they've learned long ago. Just leave me alone. Let me work in my office, and we'll see when you get out of your office. But they know better than to ask. I don't know if they ever really cared. I can't remember them ever asking what I was working on. But if they did, they would have gotten a cold, icy glare. So they're definitely not asking me much about my writing anymore.
It's taken about 15 years to finally get my wife to really honestly believe that if I'm at my computer, if I'm working, just stay out until I set a timer so she knows how long I have to go until it's done. And she can come in and ask me whatever she want to ask me. But early on in our marriage, she would come in and I would play that clip from The Shining of Nicholson behind his typewriter. When you come in here, you're distracting me.
Wrong.
Yep, just all working, no play, make jacket, doll boy, all over the place. Writers, what joy we are to live with. I don't know, is Mrs. Woodrow a writer?
Mrs. Woodrow, I'm sorry.
Are you sure? Is your wife a writer?
No, she's an excellent proofreader. So I can guarantee every book I've written, she has read through and is a great critiquer and really gives me great insights. But she's a graphic artist, graphic designer by trade. So she has the artistic side and I have the writing side. down. So we do make a pretty good team. Now that we work together, we would no longer be married if we ever tried to really work together in any sort of capacity. It would not be amiable situation, but she does have an artistic bent.
I know that there are famous couples, of course, who are each writers and they get along famously. Michael Grant and Catherine Applegate come to mind. But by and large, I've got a group of writers, my critique group, and we often joke that none of us could be married to anyone else in the group because we've all got the spouse that has the non-writing job, that has the health insurance.
That's a challenge, certainly. The health insurance, especially when you have a family and kids, is the challenge of any self-employed author or graphic designer. My wife's a self-employed graphic designer, so we don't necessarily have that resolved in our household.
Let's talk a little bit about advertising. We teased it, and I promised to get back to it. So how has your career in advertising influenced not only your writing, but also the marketing of your writing?
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. I was thinking, no, don't say it. I don't have any great marketing tips. It's funny. I can advertise someone else all day long, but I get really shy and withdrawn talking about my own work. It's that anti-narcissism aspect of my personality, that I'm not a natural born salesman. I'm not the huckster out there selling my wares. So I'm somewhat reluctant to do all that. Though the one aspect of advertising that has really helped me with is the revision stage, because when you're writing, say, a TV commercial, and for McDonald's, we'll say, right? You write a number, depending on where you are in the machine, you might be writing a bunch of different commercials, show it to your boss, they narrow it down, to his boss, he or she narrows it down. Then they show it to the client then picks one out of whatever many they're being shown. Then the client shows it to their wife and their brother-in-law, their daughter, they all have comments too. And all of a sudden you get this mishmash of comments that are from 20 different people, and you need to try to still make a really great TV commercial despite all of this different noise. And so one of the things you wonder as an advertising writer is how to hone in on the comments that make sense and understand that these comments aren't necessarily in stone, but if they're sensing something needs to be changed, it means something is wrong with your script, and it's up to you to change it in the best way possible. That might mean a whole different approach and a whole different way of thinking than any of these other 20 comments have come to your desk. But obviously, if everyone's commenting on something, there's something not working with the line or with that idea. So one of the great aspects that I can bring to the table is that when I get noise, I get comments from my editor or from beta readers or from my wife or whoever's reading it, I can do a pretty good job of identifying those comments that I agree with, ignoring the comments that maybe don't make sense, but also understanding that even though the comments I don't agree with, they probably mean something structurally or something isn't quite working in that manuscript. And I can now identify that and try to come up with my own solutions. So I think, one of the things that I do really well is revise. It's one of the reasons why I revise so much, but also I revise really well based on feedback from other people. It's all because of the training in advertising that has allowed me the opportunity and the wisdom, I guess, to cut through that clutter and discern the changes that work, the changes that don't work, and change differently the things that aren't quite working with my own vision. So that aspect of advertising has really influenced me and really, I think, has made me a much stronger writer. But the marketing part is really not something that I do great, which is surprising, right? Because that's what I've done for most of my professional career is advertising. But writing TV commercials, then getting the TV commercial noticed and sold are not exactly the same thing.
But imagine in terms of revision, this is me on the outside looking in, so I could be dead wrong. But I would imagine if you've got an idea for an ad and it's relatively well executed, but it's missing on a couple of things, you're getting those comments where there needs to be some revision. It's not quite the same as when you've got a book that you personally wrote with this idea of this is the story of my heart, and you want to take little slices of my heart, why would you do that? Whereas with an advertisement, it's a little bit more cut and dry. This either gets somebody interested in the product and hopefully primes them to buy, or it doesn't, right?
Well, with advertising, certainly if you're writing something, there's still pride of ownership. I still came up with the idea. I still wrote it, maybe based on certain features or benefits or strategies that maybe I came up with, or maybe someone else did. But I still had to create it from scratch. So there's still pride and ownership, but there's the understanding in advertising that you're not the one paying for the Super Bowl commercial, right? Someone else is. So they've invested a lot of money and time, and your bosses have, and the agency you might be working for has a lot of people working with you, the account executives and the media planners and everyone who are all coming together to make this thing work. And I understand that in writing as well. It's not just my voice. There's the editor I'm working with. There's my agent who sold my idea. There's the publisher who's investing presumably money and time and effort producing the books and hiring maybe someone to do the cover art and getting trucks to deliver the books to the bookstore and to load the warehouses and getting the people who are going to quote quotes on your book jacket. These are all people who are important to the process. It's not just me screaming on a mountaintop. And it's a team that's going to work or a team that's not going to work. So working and writing and advertising surely made me understand that I'm not the solo writer living in the jungle and without anyone to talk to. And now, if I was a self-published author, maybe I wouldn't feel that way. But I'm a traditionally published author who does rely on the kindness of strangers, so to speak. I understand that in order to make my book the best it can be, I welcome their feedback. I want them to help me and assist me and make my books not only as good as they can be, to reach the greatest audience that they can reach. So, I guess some authors and some artists, I'm the best. I'm not going to change a word. I know best, but that's not my approach. And that's probably because of my background that I do understand all the efforts and all the hands on deck that are needed. All the hats, so to speak, that are needed to make something work.
I've had a couple of different self-published authors on here, and even you think that maybe they get to be the ones that are out in the jungle, and they're, I've written my poem about a leopard, and it's perfect and it's beautiful, and if no one ever reads it, it still exists. Yay, art! And they're probably out there, but the ones I've talked to, they still have to satisfy their readers. They still have their editors that they bring in that give them feedback and make life difficult, but ultimately, produce a better book. So over the course of 30 books now, sooner or later, it has to have happened that an editor made a decision or wanted to make a decision that was not in line with your original artistic vision. How do you make your piece with something, especially if it's a drastic decision that really changes something significant about your work? Or have you gotten through 30 books and that hasn't happened?
Well, there are two different answers to that. First of all, pick your battles. If there are things that you strongly believe in, stand by them. I'm not going to make a change just to make a change. If I feel something is really important, I will fight for keeping that. But also, as I mentioned with the advertising analogy, when someone makes a change, whether it's the client or the client's mother-in-law or your supervisor, that generally means they've identified something's not working for them. So something's not working for them. There's a good chance there's a reason for it, and it's my job to figure out it's not working, why it's not working, and again, solving it in a way that does work with my vision and works with my idea, especially if it's a broader idea. For WerePenguin, for example, when I was them, maybe there was a change that someone wanted in book 1, but I knew it was going to play into my broader vision in book 3. That reader may not be aware of that, but I am. So I do have the ability to say no. Generally speaking, as long as there's a solid reason for saying no, people will respect that opinion. A solid reason for saying no, there's another solution out there that makes me happy and aligns with my, but also makes those people who aren't necessarily seeing my vision come into life in the way I intend to, make them satisfied as well.
Just thinking, yeah, there's a. Well, I'm not going to say what I was going to say.
Okay.
Let me ask you another question here about marketing, because you've got a book trailer for The Curse of the Werepenguin. It's a little bit fun and horrifying, in quotes, because you've got kids that are they're terrified that something's coming, and of course it's a penguin. Who does the book trailer, and how is that useful to you in the grand marketing strategy for your book?
So I had as much to do with that book trailer as I did finding those blurbs for my cover of my book. So unfortunately was very little. They sent me a storyboard with the idea. Being in advertising, I'm very familiar with storyboards and videos because that's part of what I do for a living. So I was very interested in what they were doing. Unfortunately, I really liked it. So there wasn't a whole lot of input that I gave to it other than, wow, this is really good. I actually had my own idea for a trailer I was going to maybe film myself, but theirs was better. So mine, or at least theirs was more professionally crafted. So there was no reason for me to go out on a limb and try to create my own. And your second part of your question, which is how these are used, and I wish I knew exactly. I see these, I think, oh, this is really great. How can I use it? Certainly I can link to it on my website, and I can link to it on social media. You'll have to ask someone closer to the actual creation of, at least of book trailers that are developed and created by publishers to quite know the range and of how they are used and how impactful they are or are not impactful on book sales. But I think the trailer is awesome. So if you haven't seen it, you go to YouTube. The Curse of the Werepenguin trailer. You'll see it. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, I'll put a link in the show notes. So check that out. It's all of a minute long, maybe less.
Yeah, somewhere between a minute, maybe a minute and a half. I think less than a minute. I know when I create things, under a minute is sort of the key. People's attention tend to leave a little bit after that, which is why television commercials are 30 seconds long, sometimes 60, but very seldom longer than that. 60 seconds is about the limit of most people's attention spans, especially when seeing videos online. And even that, if you watch a TikTok video, for example, this is a fraction of that amount of time.
That is something for any advertising people that should happen to be watching or listening. Something I've enjoyed recently is there are commercials that get to their point within 5 seconds, and then we'll do something fun for the remainder of the commercial and generally acknowledge that you now have the ability to skip it. Like, hey, thanks for the 5 seconds. Now here's somebody juggling, here's something entertaining if you want to continue. Otherwise, go on about your business, enjoy the video.
Yeah, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but when a video comes on and says skip ad as an option, the vast majority of people press skip ad. I don't have again statistics to give the exact numbers, but the goal is to make that first 5 seconds either tell your story or make it so compelling that you don't press skip ad. But even the most compelling video is going to be very difficult to get people's fingers off that skip ad button when people have other things they want to do with their lives. They have things they want to get to.
Where they do get me is if they've got, a 3 or 5 minute commercial, something ridiculous like that. And I'm listening to a podcast, so I'm away from my computer. They come in the middle of the podcast, and I've got my hands literally in soapy water doing dishes, or I'm busy doing something else. And I think, well, 30 seconds, this will be over, and it keeps going. I'm like, a minute, this needs to be over soon. 2 minutes, I'm going to have to dry my hands and actually physically walk to the computer. So well played, advertisers. You probably get skipped by lots of people, but you catch me, I'm at your mercy.
I have no patience for any of that. So anything that's longer than 30, 60 seconds, I'm not watching it unless it's something that's vital. Instructional video on how to, do something amazingly awesome that's going to change my life, but very, very seldom does it happen.
I'm not watching it so much. It's just being held hostage because I can't go on listening to the enjoyable thing that I was listening to. Well, let me ask you this a question I'm always striving to get an answer to, and I know that the standard line is the thing about advertising is only 50% of it works, but nobody knows which 50%, or some phrase along those lines. But do you have some idea of what has been the most effective marketing strategy for your books thus far?
I do not have a great answer, but whatever they did for Harry Potter, I'd say that. But I don't have any great insight into that.
Sure, just get a theme park designed after the Werepenguin, and you'll be in good shape.
As an author, I can, going on school visits is a great way to get the word out. You're talking to, a few hundred kids at one time. You're not talking to tens of thousands of kids at one time, but going on school visits, attending conferences where there may be large groups of other authors and our audience are, as an author, are great mechanisms to use to get a following and get the word out. But in terms of mass media advertising, I am reliant to a great extent on my publisher for that.
And how often do you attend conferences?
2 or 3 a year, I would say. Kind of depends. Usually around a book launch, and maybe a few more. But I do a lot of visits. I try to do school visits throughout the school year, obviously, not in the summer. But those could be, those are a few times a month usually. So it's a great way to not only promote yourself, but to be around kids. My kids now grown up. They were, my age, the perfect book writing age when I first started out, but that was 10 years ago. So they're 10 years older. They have graduated from the types of books that I am writing. And it would just be weird to hang out at elementary schools by myself. So the fact that people invite me to go to them, to actually talk to kids and to meet them and to see them and to hear what they have to say about my book and other things is a great resource to have. So not only do I enjoy the school visits from a marketing standpoint, but from a writing standpoint, an educational standpoint, I have to write books that reach that audience. Otherwise, it's hard to reach that audience in any way versus 10 years ago when my kids had their friends over all the time. So it was much easier at the time to kind of put your head into the head of kids and remember what it was like when you were a kid yourself.
So when you're at a school visit, what kind of market research are you doing? Do you have some standard questions that you'll ask the kids about what they're reading, or?
No, not standard. I mean, it'll be a conversation. So, what books? What's your favorite books? Oh, great! I read that too. What do you like about it? Why don't you like this book? I mean, I might ask a little bit, but usually they're conversations. So the conversation may steer in other directions. I'm not necessarily setting out to gather market research. Just that relates to them as a person and try to hear how they say things and hear where they're coming from and remember what it was like to be that age myself, which can then help me be a better writer when I'm writing about protagonists that share those same qualities.
So you're not showing up with a clipboard and a pen and sit down in a focus group situation.
I maybe should. It's actually probably a pretty good idea, but I haven't thought of it yet. Maybe if I do, I'll make sure I mention you.
Oh, great.
Excuse me, Rob Kent told me I need to use a clipboard. I'm sorry that I'm asking all these questions, but talk to Rob Kent. He's the one that told me to ask these questions. I'm just doing what he told me to do. No, I'll stop goofing off and answer these questions.
Question number 1: what's your favorite Rob Kent novel? Go on. What is the tip for a successful school visit? How do you know if one's gone well?
Anytime you're a public speaker, I think you can read your audience. If they're talking amongst themselves and rolling their eyes and bored, kids can get bored pretty quickly. You can tell if you've lost their interest. Maybe respectful and not speaking and not heckling you, but they're shuffling. My presentations have a lot of give and take, audience response, I'm asking them questions to keep them involved. And so if you ask a question and the room is, you hear a pin drop, you've lost them. If everyone's raising their hand because they're all eager to participate and ask their questions, and they're at the edge of their lotus position seats to hear your next word, then obviously you are resonating with them. So I make a lot of effort to make my presentations funny and engaging, and not just me speaking, but having them participate in some ways to keep their interest. But I think you can tell pretty easily in any audience whether you have your audience's attention or if you've lost them.
Yeah, except when it's a podcast and you can't see or hear the audience, then you just have to hope for the best.
I guess so.
Assume that they're in their car. Maybe they're stuck with the dishes and they want to turn it off, but they can't get their hands dried. Oh, I've been there, friend. Well, what's a good length for a school visit or a presentation?
So my presentations tend to be between 45 and 50 minutes long. They could be an hour. Younger kids can't sit still that long, so maybe if I'm doing a kindergarten or first grade, I might limit it to a half hour. That includes question and answer. So if I'm doing 45 minutes, it might be 35 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for questions and answer. Sometimes it might take longer. Again, it's some participation. So if people are really raising their hand, we could run out of time. It doesn't happen a lot of time. I'm usually pretty clock savvy, so I know when I can stop asking questions and just skip ahead, sort of thing. But I would say I usually allow 45 to 50 minutes for my typical school presentation, and then I might give 3, during the school day, one for, one grade, one for next grade. One usually they're auditorium filled presentations, so I might do entire grade, then an entire grade or two, then an entire grade or two, depending on the size of the school.
Gotcha. So you could be there all day doing 4 or 5 presentations by the time you're done?
I try not to do 4 or 5. I try to limit it to 3 officially. I might make exceptions. It's sort of draining. I'm not a natural. I enjoy writing. When you're writing, you're by yourself in a room. There's no one around you. You don't talk a lot. So that's kind of my default. So actually being on display in front of people and entertaining them and being verbose is not necessarily my default. So it takes a lot of energy for me to do them. And so 3 is where I limit if I can. I would not do 5 unless there was some major reason why I needed to, but I don't know what that would be.
To sell more books.
Well, I've done like an evening presentation in addition to a school day. So if you add in the evening presentation, at like a family night kind of event, then there'd be more than 3 presentations if you included that.
And I assume when you come out, you don't say, "Hi, I'm Allan Woodrow. This is my book, Curse of the Werepenguin, Chapter 1," and just start reading. What are you coming out and are you talking specifically about your books, or what does your presentation typically entail?
I have more than one presentation that I do, but generally speaking, it's about my life and my writing and how I've become a better writer. Hopefully they're funny, but I use my own examples. I mentioned earlier in this conversation how I wanted to be a writer when I was in 3rd grade. So I share, one of my first book I ever wrote in 3rd grade, which obviously is horrible, and talk about how, despite it being horrible and despite my fear of failure, which I already touched on here, was keeping me from pursuing this passion of mine, but I was able to work past it, and how important it is for anyone, even if you're in elementary school, whether you're scared of trying out for a school band or trying out for a sport team or trying to make a new friend because you're convinced that person will never want to be your friend or never want to make that team or be good enough for anything. You can be like me and listen to that voice and put your dreams or what you want to do aside. Or you can ignore that voice. And look, it worked for me, right? I ignored that voice. Now I've written lots and lots of books. And if I continue to listen to the voice, I never would have succeeded. So hopefully that lesson can, perhaps a smaller, in a more narrowly focused way, can also help and encourage kids to find their own dreams and pursue their own loves as well.
Well, I tell you what, I appreciate you being so verbose. And speaking with us today, I know I'm wearing you out, and I don't want to do that. I never want to leave anybody after the end of one of these just going, "Oh my God, why did I ever agree to go on that podcast? I'm so tired and exhausted now. What am I going to do with the rest of my day aside from maybe sleep?" So I've got two more questions for you, and we'll call it a day. Does that sound fair?
That sounds great.
So, first question I have to ask, because it wouldn't be the Middle Grade Ninja podcast if I didn't. Allan Woodrow, have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I've never seen a flying saucer that I'm aware of. I do believe they exist, but I'm agnostic on that. So I've never seen one. So I think they likely exist, but I can't say definitively I believe in them or not. If you told me that you'd seen a flying saucer and convinced it was, I'd likely believe you. But not having done it myself or known anyone personally who has seen a flying saucer, it's still a little bit of a stretch for me.
I have not seen one personally. I did have an aunt who saw one, and it was always sort of amused me because she was a science teacher, and she was very strict, and she'd seen it with her daughter and a couple of cousins. And I suspect that if she had seen it just on her own, she never would have told anybody. She just shut up about it and blocked out that memory, and it never happened. But because there were witnesses, she had to acknowledge that, yes, we saw this thing fly up and down the street. And she'd always just get this look on her eye, or just kind of roll her eyes and be just generally disgruntled when it would come up. And she was the aunt that always gave books for Christmas. I'm sorry?
Now, I've never seen a flying saucer, but I was abducted for 3 years by aliens. I'm not sure if that counts. I never saw the exterior of the ship, so I was kind of in a cage for most of that, but until I escaped. So I'm not sure if that really answered your question, but I might have dreamt it, but I'm pretty sure that happened.
Did they tell you the secret of the universe while you were there? Nope, no time for sharing wisdom. It's just 3 years of probing, and then you're out.
Right.
To turn us back to terrestrial matters, my next question for you, Allan, is if there was some bit of advice that somebody could have said to you early in your career that would have made easier your path, that would have smoothed things over for all the authors who are listening, what would that advice have been, and what would you like them to take away from this?
Well, this isn't going to answer that correctly exactly, because I had a pretty easy path. Once I decided I was going to become a writer, it didn't take me that long to sell a book series to a major publisher. So it was the not writing that was my problem. And again, because I hadn't written for so long, I think by the time I finally did write, I was already pretty well accomplished as an advertising writer. I could write pretty well, and it was bursting out of me these ideas. So, not to sound like a broken record, you just ignore that voice that says, no, don't do it, and take it seriously. Don't treat it like a hobby. If you're passionate about it, make it happen. You're the only one who can.
Excellent advice. That's true. Nobody else cares as much as you care. Allan, where can esteemed audience find you online? Where can they stalk you and buy all your books?
Well, I would recommend not stalking. I do have an electric fence around the house just in case we have stalkers. But you can find me online at allanwoodrow.com, and that's 2 L's, ALLAN, Woodrow.com. And I'm also on most social media, so you can find me as well there. But my website certainly is a great place to start.
And as always, esteemed audience, you can find me at middlegradeninja.com. Head over there, follow the link, get your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. Check out the schedule for upcoming episodes. Make sure you come back here on Tuesday. Tuesday, when we'll be chatting with author Laura Martin. And then later in the week when we chat with Sharon M. Draper and Dan Gutman. So look forward to that. Allan, I have been asking our guests to sign us off. And our sign-off phrase is the very ninja-like, totally justifies the name of the show phrase, hi-ya and what have you. Will you sign us off?
Hi-ya and what have you.